Hello everyone, this is Raheel, and today I will be going over 5 principles I use the most when making buttons. So, we're just going to be covering the buttons with background today. I know there are buttons that if you remove the background, there's a whole bunch of different principles for them and how they work in the user experience, but we're just going to be talking about the ones with a button background. So let's start off with spacing. So spacing is really important when it comes to a button because this will be applied when you go into CSS and in web development. The spacing between the actual edge of the button and the edge of the text itself is known as padding, or any of the content inside of the button. So the padding over here, I like to think of it as the top and bottom is half of the length of the side. So to demonstrate this, I'll just turn on this grid map I have on over here. So as you can see, you don't actually need this when you're working in real life products, but this is just to demonstrate my point. The padding over here, as you can see, is a certain length, and as you can see over here, just to eyeball it, it's about half of this length. And this is about the golden rule for how buttons are perceived by humans and how commonly you'll see them. So it doesn't matter what type of button you're doing, I think this would be a really good rule to follow. And then we got contrast. So contrast is really important when making buttons because it includes, because users want to see a good call to action and they want to be able to read it quickly. So this is an easily readable button, but this is less easily readable. But in terms of contrast records, this actually has a higher contrast ratio than this does when showing up on most screens. But say if this was on a black background, then this would have the same contrast ratio as this. This is just due to the background and the color of the text being the exact same. But for now, let's just look at this button and say that this button actually has a better contrast ratio than this button just due to the fact that this is less noticeable because of the blue and black resemblance. And then we got shadows. I like to think of shadows as nice and subtle and a good addition. I don't like to think of them as a 3D extrusion or embossing, just like this button demonstrates over here. So you can see that this button has a really strong black shadow over here, and it's quite visible, quite opaque. It's not very soft like this one, and it sort of looks a little off in a way. If you were to go on a real site looking at this button, you would actually think it might be a 3D button for a second before realizing it's a shadow that wasn't done too correctly. Now I like to think shadows are nice and subtle in the real world, and we want to keep a good subtle light on the shadows that we use in web development as well. So the shadows that I put on this button is a very soft, light blue tinted shadow. So I basically took this color and I went into the drop shadow panel and just took the original color and moved it up this way a little bit, making it desaturated but also moving it towards the white, making it lighter. And this is a really good option for, a really good rule of thumb for making shadows. You don't necessarily have to follow this when making everything you make, but I like to follow this rule when making shadows for buttons. If it's a white button, then I recommend using a black shadow. If it's a black button, I don't recommend using a shadow. This can be applied throughout any program. Probably not Photoshop, they have a lot of different rules of using it, but this is just how Figma goes about it. So the blur I have is 10, the Y value, which is 4 pixels, I believe, or 4 points, and the opacity of the shadow is 35% with a little bit of a lighter hue. And then I just have it on normal. You can have it on multiply though, that's what Photoshop does automatically, but I just like to have it on normal. And then corners. So these are 3 ways on how you can do corners. You can learn all about UX principles and how these corners will reflect your brand. This seems to be more of a softer sort of approach. Rounding corners are very friendly looking. Then this seems to be more very professional approach. Like if you're a real estate business, you'll see a lot of them using hard, sharp corners. And then this one is a little bit in between, but this one is one I like to avoid. I'd say this is like a weird capsule looking shape, the ones you find in Kinder eggs or something. I like to stick with the pill or slightly rounded corner ones, but definitely not this because it does look very unappeasing to the eye. It's straight and then long round corner and then straight. It seems something that should be saved for a racetrack. Last but not least, the icons. And as you can see, the icons over here are differently placed. So this one is above the button, which works in some scenarios, but definitely not in buttons themselves. This one is the general approach of how I like to do it. You can have the button on either side of the text, but this one generally does not look very attractive to the eye, and I recommend sticking with the side layout buttons. So right now I'll just make a quick button here just to show you with all these little principles applied. and select everything, drag it in the center. And there's our button. So that's a pretty simple button itself. In fact, I'd actually take this and turn the font size to regular. And the font I'm using is Monster. There are many more principles to come. These are just the ones I like to use for backgrounds. And that's pretty much it today. If you did like this video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe if you would like to see more of this content.